All right, great. Thank you all for your patience.
If I can, I'll jump in at this point and call this meeting to order. It's the January 25th, 2023 meeting of the Abandoned and Discontinued Roads Commission. I apologize for not being there in person. Today I have a cold and, you know, the voice is down somewhere like Henry Kissinger's, and I apologize, but I didn't want to come and sneeze and cough on everybody. I didn't think that'd be polite or helpful. So thank you for indulging in my being here on remote. Can we take the roll call now of all the members that are online and present?
Sure. I will note that that John Monk and Brian Bronson and Kathy Netto are all absent. From there, Jim Katsifikas.
Here.
Steve Young.
Here.
Carla Black.
Here.
Rebecca Graham.
Here.
I am here. Vivian McHale. Roberta Manter.
Here.
Pete Coughlin.
Present.
Chris McCabe.
Here.
And Ryan Pelletier.
Here.
All right. Next item would be the minutes, adoption of minutes for the January 11, 2023 meeting. There had been a set prepared. Vivian had done a great job putting that together, and I know that there were some changes that were suggested by Roberta Manter, and I believe those were incorporated in the draft that went out earlier today, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so are there any other changes that people would like to make to those minutes?
Yeah, I got a few, and just reading this, I think they're just typos.
Okay.
I don't know if you got them in front of you here, but on page 3.
I don't.
Right in the middle of the paragraph, where it says, Roberta said the can be a road association.
Okay. Are you looking at the revised version?
Yep.
Or, okay.
I don't know what that was supposed to be.
There can be.
Roberta said there can be a road association on a public easement.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, we may want to clarify in that addition that it's a public road. I think there's an L left out.
Okay, got it.
Over on page 4, 3/4 of the way down where it said, Pete said that every road, and he gave the example of Wyndham's limitations on moorings. That actually was Winthrop's.
Okay.
Winthrop, you're right.
Okay, thanks.
And the next paragraph down says, Rain posed an example. I think that means Brian.
Sure does. Thank you.
Easy transposition.
And then on the next page 5, halfway down where it mentions ADR, that's the first place I saw that. So some people may not know, and
Got it.
I'm not sure I know what ADR really means.
Alternative dispute resolution. I'll spell that out.
Okay, and
Thank
then 2 lines below that where it talks about the community mediation as possibly a good entree. I'm thinking roast beef, spaghetti, or something there.
Yeah.
Not sure. Is that a good use of word, or
One less E and we're okay.
what's it
Alright.
supposed to be?
Starting point, probably. I'll change it.
By
That's
to
fine.
starting point instead of entree. That sounds better. All right, that's all I got.
All righty.
You're a good proofreader, right? You do
I know,
stuff like
I gotta
that.
send stuff to you.
Redacted.
I like entree.
Or any other changes, additions, revisions to the minutes proposed? All right, do we have a motion to revise those as suggested by Roberta and by Pete?
So,
Second?
I'll second that.
All right. All in favor? We'll do the roll call vote.
Jim.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Ella.
yes.
Rebecca.
Yes.
I vote yes. Roberta.
Yes.
Pete.
Yes.
Chris.
Yes.
Ryan.
Yes.
Kathy, John, and Brian are absent, but unanimous of the members present.
Great, thank you. So we have minutes, and those, when revised, can be incorporated into the report that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Next will be an update on the Commission's online presence. I'll tell you that I've spoken with folks from the Office of Information Technology, and they've gone upstairs, and upstairs is saying the same thing. We're going to cough up the money if we want to be on the website. So $500 per month, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll make the request to the legislature in our cover letter with our report. Now, I know Vivian's been looking elsewhere as well, and I think has some additional detail to share with you.
I just wanted to tell you that I ran down talking to folks at the legislature about the spot that you found in the lists, IP list and mailing list, that looked like there's a subcommittee on discontinued roads once upon a time with an interested parties list. That was a subcommittee of the legislative committee, so that's why the legislature hosted that for them. And because we are not a legislative committee, we are created by the legislature, but that doesn't make us a legislative committee. We can't have things listed on the calendar unless we are actually using legislative space, because that's how the calendar is populated. You go to room 220, like where we were meeting before. You can put in an event that way if it's approved, but because we're here. So I talked to Suzanne Gresser, who is the director, I guess she's the executive director at the executive director's office. Does that make sure yeah. So I spoke with her. I had reached out to a guy named Nick Rendy, who was there, the head of their IT. They all said, we hear you, but this happens all the time, that you get created to do this great work, but you know, she said, we have to pay $1,200 to put a notice in the KJ. And I said, yeah, but you have a budget. And she said, well, you're doing the right thing by trying to chase it down. So I didn't want you all to think that that had gone by the way, but getting sort of the same responses.
So we need to propose legislation to fix that.
So we need to propose more financing.
And so in the draft cover letter that I put together to go along with the report, the last paragraph says, by the way, we would like to be able to give public notice of our meetings so that we can get input and we can have some comments and some advice. And so it's asking them for money to allow us to have that sort of web presence that other commissions established by the legislature have. So that's probably about the best we're going to be able to do. Throw that in front of the legislature and see if they'll get some money for us.
And just one more note around those administrative issues. No luck with our paralegal hiring efforts. We had another interview, person who considered it, but hiring is really tough right now in general. So we'll keep at it.
I think we've probably all seen how that goes these days.
Right.
So even if we get funded somehow with X amount of dollars, it's still ridiculous to pay $500 a month for a website. We could do better than that. But what would be, I mean, what are we going to pursue once we have money?
Well, if we had the money, Pete, what we were hoping to do is get on maine.gov, because that's where you would look for state agencies, state commissions, something that's created by the legislature or by the governor's office. That's where you'd look for information and for meeting dates.
But is that what costs $500 a month?
Yes. And it's because agencies have this built into their budgets, as Vivian was just talking about. But we're not an agency with a budget. And I'm not feeling that flush that I want to be volunteering $500 per month for our commission to be able to publicize its events. It shouldn't come down to that.
And I gather we can't do one of the free or cheap websites due to security demands by the higher up.
That's the response that we got.
Because my website is free.
I know plenty are, but it's sort of we're a creation of the state without money, but beholden to their rules.
We'll try rattling a few pages.
Yeah, so let me just say that, you know, I do 6 or 7 municipal websites through govoffice.com, which is a different name now. And a lot of towns in Maine use it, the state government, it's for state, local, county government and nonprofits. And the fee structure is basically population of the town or the county. I don't know how the state one works, but is that a way to pursue? Because like most of the towns I do, it's $40 a month. But I don't, it's not, it could be a link on the state website, but that's a heck of a lot. And I'd even volunteer to do it on my own if it had to be linked on the state website, but I don't know if this Gov Office, which is now a new company, it's called Catalyst.
When you say link to the state website, or can you tell me a little bit more what you mean by that?
Well, what you just said, Vivian, was because it's a state commission here that it'd have to be on the state website. Maybe it doesn't have to be. Could it just be a regular website hosted by Gov Office, which does lots of state, county, and municipal hosting with proper securities?
Sure, that sounds great to me. That's the first time I'm not aware of it. That sounds like a,
Get familiar with that, Rebecca, right? They do a
Only
lot.
vaguely, only because our IT, I think, is involved with a bunch of state players to try to deal with a number of the security issues that municipalities, because they lack those resources and full-time IT staff are dealing with. So I know that there's some work in progress.
Yeah, because they exhibit every year at the MMA convention, they pull full-time ads in the magazine. And there's a lot of towns in Maine and across the country that use Gov Office to host their website.
I'll look into it. And
Like, I could do that for you if you want, because I could ask them, because it's obviously not population based
sure,
like a town.
that would be fantastic if that's the sort of thing that we could
All right, let me
just.
If I could interject on that too, I think that's a fantastic idea especially since that's their specialty. But this has been a frustrating conversation, as it's gone on for me too, because our nonprofit land trust, we have our website. I know how, like I made it, it's not hard. I think the extra security levels are available through all the providers, Network Solutions or even GoDaddy. You have to pay extra for security. But again, I think there's an opportunity to have a website where you have free downloads accessible there and some information. And if there's more detail, there could be a link to statutes or whatever you need.
Would also be curious, and maybe this is asking for the sky, but does that also have a sign up for a mailing list kind of function too?
Yeah, every town that I have people voluntarily sign up to get town email. So,
That would be.
Pittston, I got 250 people that signed up.
That would be fantastic, and then it wouldn't have then amongst all of us, the point of having all of these faces and voices around this table, then we push it out the way we can through our own vehicles and offices, I think is the way to do it.
Did you say that was $40 a month though?
Yeah, well, that's because on a municipal side, they charge by the population of the town. If it was falling at 70,000, that is a higher fee per month. But still a real reasonable fee.
I
Yeah,
was just thinking, because so it would be $500 for the year for Maine.gov, right?
Maine.gov is $500 a month
Oh, it's a month.
ongoing,
Oh, that's what I was,
and we have a one-time $500, like.
Yeah.
A lot.
that's why I thought that was for the year, so that's,
Yeah,
way cheaper.
So if it's $40 a month, there are 12 months in a year, and there are 12 of us, can we each pitch in $40 and pay for a month? I'd pitch in.
Steve?
I'll give 10.
He wants a day in a month.
All right, let me check out how that works, if it is an option or not, but at least I'll check it out.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
What's the bothersome thing is there should be something on the state's website that there's a page that lists this commission and any other commission, then it can link to a website like that. Just so that you go somewhere central. I think that's the whole idea of Maine.gov, is you can find your way around Maine government in one place. And if we just have that mentioned so that we can link to this sort of Gov Office site, if that in the end works, that it just boggles my mind that we can't do that. And so we'll try to press for that at least as we go forward. So if are we all set then? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me for interjecting. Yeah, that's a good point. All we'd need, if we have this, go with this system, is to have one hyperlink in the main.gov. That's it. So I can't imagine they would charge us too much for having a sentence in there.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
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 It always seems so simple. Any other ideas on our web presence?
If this is a problem for a lot of commissions, I think we need legislation that allows some place where these commissions can get on without paying $500 a month.
That's a different bill, Roberta. That's a different
Well, let's hope it doesn't take that. That'd be unfortunate. So I think probably the thing that's most important to get done today is to come up with a final report that we can submit to the legislature by February 1st. I spent a good portion of MLK Day weekend putting together the draft, and I know Vivian's looked through it, so we've both had some input to get that together. And I know Roberta has been a great editor and has gone through and found my typos and my mistakes and my citations, and I thank you. I appreciate that, and has some substantive comments as well. How do we want to go through that report? Because I'm sure others have comments. I want to make sure that I don't talk too much and that I hear from you so that we get this report to be the commission's report.
Jim, could I start just by telling you what I have in mind that I'm going to be adding to the appendices and what I know has come in since we put it out for people's input, so people know that that's going to be part of our work over the next few days. So we've gotten substantive comments and some stylistic and typographical ones from Roberta, like you said. Also from Roberta, I'm going to be adding in your small tweaks document. And then you sent some, I've got to figure out where we are with the sample roads inventory, like I need to look back at my emails for the last couple of days, but I know you've sent some information along those lines that we'll also include.
There is somebody who, as a volunteer, did a road inventory for the town of Bodenham. And I think he did an excellent job with it. He did exactly what I would recommend, which is just copying out the warrant article for each road that he can find in the warrants.
Okay.
He didn't try to make any legal interpretation. The one thing I would have added is what the result of the vote was, because that's important.
Okay.
But then once he had the list, he was able to map out all the ones he could locate. And a couple of the ones that he wasn't sure where they were, I was able to find, I knew some other places to dig for the information. And I was able to find where a couple of the others were. So I think there's just one that's not located now.
Okay. And refresh my recollection, is that one of the attachments that you've sent recently?
Yeah, there are two
Probably in
attachments.
the last.
One is called Appendix C and one is called Appendix D.
Awesome.
C
Okay.
is the list and D is the map.
Awesome.
there was-
Okay, good.
There was also the presentation that I made right after Jim's presentation. There wasn't just the small tweaks. There was another paper that I put in for that.
I think by small tweaks, I was thinking of everything that you did that
Okay,
day, but
okay.
I will make sure that it's both.
Okay.
And then in addition, let me just make a note of that real quick. I have Pete's DOT map finder tool PDF. That will be another one that's slotted in. All the public testimony. We spelled Chris's last name wrong, and I think that's the list of everything that I have going, and John's contributions from his email yesterday, that pretty big paragraph. So Jim will work on incorporating some of that. I'll make sure the other pieces of it are there. Given all of that, then I think today, Jim, tell me if I'm going too far, but I think we want to hear what else people have to say so that we know the universe of edits we're working with, so I can put it all together and then get it in on time by February 1st, which is, can't believe that's right around the corner.
That's where I was heading. I was hoping that we could work from the draft that's out there and agree to the changes as we discuss them, at the meeting, and then adopt that report with those changes, without having to send them out to everybody and get everyone to read it again and okay it. Just in terms of trying to be efficient, that's what Vivian and I discussed this morning. Does that make sense to the commission?
Yes, if I could suggest that we give permission for grammatical corrections to Vivian. Like anybody suggests grammatical errors, we don't have to go through the whole commission. We just go with it if it's anything like that.
I think that makes perfect sense, Steve, and I think that's kind of the point. I think we want to agree in substance and theory and in the spirit of the changes today, and then leave it to Maya and Jim's eyes to get it in place and get it without another huge review, because we could look at it forever. So.
Sound good, everyone?
Jim, great job on putting this thing together over the weekend. Too bad you had to spend any time doing that, but it's a great product. What I might suggest is, with anything that is pages long, especially with legislators, it might be good to have an executive summary right up on the front end. That might be a third to a half a page that just kind of summarizes everything that's in here. Because I don't know if many people are going to read all this stuff, but the executive summary might be a good way to just say what's in here.
Good idea, Pete. Thanks.
It's just a report, and here are some quick things that we came up with or didn't come up with.
Okay. Do we want to go through this by pages just to see if there are any changes as we go through?
Yeah, has everybody here had a chance to read all this stuff, or where is everyone at?
Can I interject here for myself, if you don't mind? I have gone through the whole thing. I think it was really excellently done, and I don't have any recommended changes. So it looks great to me. I'm still, of course, confused by the status of certain roads and everything else. I mean, you've made it plain it's a very confusing thing. But as far as the document itself, I don't have any recommended changes. Thank you.
Thank you. As far as the introduction and the commission process, Roman numerals 1 and 2, any comments on that?
No.
The recommendation simply sets out what our duties are at the beginning in Roman numeral 3. And then what I tried to do was, on the basis of the comments that we received, written and oral, come up with addressing what the statute asked us to consider in A, and then in B, talk about prioritizing what the issues are. And I have Roberta's comments in front of me, and yes, I understand. Let's get this issue out there. The first, when we're talking about the priority of issues, Roberta believes that the number one priority for the responses she'd received from main roadways was the unconstitutionality of public easements. I agree it's an issue. I don't think we would differ on whether it has any legal merits, but I understand it's an issue to many members. But from what we heard, it sounded like, stepping back, access, whether it's a public easement or a private road or whatever, seemed to be the bigger issue we kept hearing from people about. Whether it was someone blocking their access or someone tearing up the public easement that they repaired on their own money, that it was just the ability to have access, and then liability if they did try to fix that. And then how do we prevent damage from happening? Those seem to be the larger picture issues. I'm wrong, please correct me.
Well, I'm gonna kind of put my foot down on this one and say I wanted to at least mention that there are questions of whether it's constitutional to have a public road with no public maintenance. Because we have Jordan versus Canton that says that that will inevitably destroy the access, and destruction of access requires just compensation. And how do you compensate when the access keeps getting destroyed? I think you did a good job of summarizing it at the end of one of the meetings when you said that it sounded like the two biggest issues were loss of access when there is no public easement retained, and loss of access when a public easement is retained and the public destroys it. So, you know, that second one there is where this question of constitutionality comes in. So I know we cannot declare a law unconstitutional, but I think we can ask the legislature to look at whether there's a way to find out if they can ask for an opinion of the justices. I know that was done before with regard to spending public funds on private roads, and this is sort of the flip side of it. It's private funds on public roads. So I think they would have the authority to ask the justices of the Supreme Court to take a look at that. And again, I would want to put in a brief.
The legislature does have the authority on so-called solemn occasions to go to the court to see if they'll render an opinion on some legislation that's before them as to whether or not it's constitutional or legal. What we could do is this. There's a discussion on access, and it talks about the ADR process and all. What we could mention in there is the result of Maine Roadways survey that a number of that its members feel that the biggest issue is the constitutionality of the public easement matter itself. We can attribute it to Maine Roadways, which I think is appropriate. It was your survey, and we can mention it as being among the access issues.
Well, I would want it to be mentioned that the roadways members see that as being the number one issue.
We would say, you could say that.
As long as that gets in there, I'll settle for that.
How does the commission feel about that?
If I don't get in there, my husband's gonna hang me.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Where are we looking in terms of where this would go?
This would be on the discussion with regard to our recommendations in B. Under equal priority, it says access and then liability and maintenance and prevention of damages, all in italics. This would be within the discussion on access, and it would be
At the bottom of the page, page 6 or so. There's no numbers. But
right.
priority and access at the bottom of the page on the left side.
Yeah, where it says equal priority access. Well, we could mention in there the paragraph before recreational users also have access issues. Right there, we could add that Maine Roadways reports that the biggest issue, the primary issue among its members is the constitutionality of the public easement. So this is another concern that's out there that we all have to consider.
I wish it could be closer to the top, but that's the only place where you can see putting it in. At least it gets in there.
I'll make sure it gets mentioned if that's all right with the rest of the commission. But does anyone have any objection? That's probably the easiest way to do that in this setting.
Nope.
No.
Okay. Okay, so with regard to, let's get back to, and I wish this had page numbers. I think I tried to do that, but with appendices, it doesn't always work out real well because you don't need the page numbers there.
Can we just number them if we know where to start?
Where it's Roman numeral, well, let's do this. That's a good suggestion. Let's just, where it says recommendations, Roman numeral 3, that page, it has the statute, chapter 743 all set out. Let's call that page 2. We call that page 2. And then put page numbers for the rest of the text. They'll give 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
So Jim,
So it's-
where, you say that again, where it's Roman numeral 3, capital recommendations, we're starting that as page.
That'll be page 2.
Okay, thank you.
And so with regard to the discussion on property owner liability, that's one thing the legislature asked us to talk about. Is there anything you want to change or add to that discussion?
This on page 5, Jim.
Okay,
Bottom.
2, I think.
Yeah, 2 as the property owner liability.
Oh,
Right at the bottom.
Yeah.
I think that's what it uses. Right?
yep. Right, that's subsection 1, property owner liability. So that goes on page 2 to page 3.
No changes? Any changes?
Anything?
so
Okay.
I just want to make sure that at the top of page 3 there, it lists the background, but then it says the commission therefore recommends. We all okay with that statement?
Creation of statutory limitation on liability for property owners who maintain, repair, and or plow a public easement where the municipality does not do that.
Yeah,
And then we suggest that it would be like the one for people who open their properties up for recreational use.
Except that this would not be just for recreational use, correct?
Correct.
Right, that's just sort of the guideline.
We had a kind of a scare, storm before this last one. Our road ended up being glare ice in spots. Wasn't as bad as it's been in past years. There's been times when I could skate on it. But there was a patch of ice at the top of a hill, and our mail carrier came in possibly going a little faster than was prudent for the road conditions and for the vehicle she was driving. But she crested the top of the hill, hit a patch of ice, and spun around and hit a utility pole and pretty much totaled the Jeep.
Oof.
Fortunately, she's saying it's not your fault. You know, I know it's just the road conditions, and so, you know, we were thinking, oh no, is she gonna blame us for the road conditions?
And I think
We,
that's,
we have no capability to salt and sand half a mile of road.
I think that's where this is going, is like it would mirror the landowner liability, so unless it's malicious.
Correct.
could be-
Didn't intend to make it icy.
Yeah, I mean,
We understand. All right. So the next piece, number 2, public easement retention over an abandoned or discontinued road, including the scope of permitted and actual public use. The question is, did we endorse the idea of the continuing automatic retention of a public easement on discontinuance? And I think there was some split of authority, some split of opinion among the commissioners, but the majority view was, yes, it's good to prevent there from being landlocked lots. We don't want that to happen, and for that reason, there ought to be a public easement. But there were some who had different ideas, and I've tried to recount those from our discussion.
Could we put in automatic retention of a public easement if there is no other access? Or something to that effect? Because there are other options. There's the option of making it into a private shared easement. And I'd hate to have it automatically always be a public easement when there are some options that might work better. I think that's kind of the fallback position if there's no other way to get there.
Okay, so maybe what we could do is that last sentence, some commission members prefer that the property owners themselves first attempt to reach agreement as to whether a road should be privately maintained and possibly a private road association after town discontinuance before a public easement is retained. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's better. I just don't know if there's a better way to word the top part of the paragraph there.
Well, I think what the majority agreed on is what the majority agreed on, and that is, we don't object to it. There ought to be automatic retention of a public easement on if the town isn't going to in order to make sure people aren't landlocked. I think there were some who said there ought to be a payment if you're going to do that, and only then do we agree. And then, as you just offered, and I think Pete Coughlin was probably there too, let's encourage these people to privately reach an agreement on maintaining a private way before we go to retention of a public easement.
Right, I had said, I don't think there should be an automatic anything. It should be discussion among the butters, and then if the butters can't agree, then it goes to the town meeting on the council for them to discuss. Let the people decide before anything automatic happens.
The only thing about that is if there's a change of ownership in the public road, down the line, is that gonna rear its ugly head again, that problem?
Steve, I think municipalities would argue it does on a regular basis, and oftentimes the public easement is the only tool to get people to deal with neighborhood disputes in a way that allows access. And it is only through that public easement by saying, no, I'm sorry, you have to let someone through, that there is that opportunity for them to get access to the properties.
This is a question too, like going further into the page 5 where, like title 23, I believe, it was for the access for, ATVs, snowmobiles. As if it's a public easement, you can't access it, but can the town give permission to ATVs and snowmobiles to use that public easement? Even though it says by law that they're not supposed to be on it?
The way I believe that MMA's attorneys have read that statute and interpreted it is that it's the municipal officers who can make that designation over the public easement. And I think it's important to know that public easements are also public roads.
Right.
So oftentimes even our maintained road just is an easement. They don't actually own it, but they are continuing it. So that's why that easement language is in there, and that's why the easement is broadly defined in that way.
Because it specifically states, like, once it's a public easement, that ATVs and snowmobiles aren't allowed on it.
That was after, that was one of the ways, and the legislature has weighed in since 2015 and messed things up further from how they already were. And the way that is supposed to be read was supposed to be moving forward. So from that point in time, discontinuance by abandonment is now a process rather than a factual finding, which there hasn't been. There haven't been. So arguably all of the public easements fall under the old public easement interpretation, not the future, because no one has gone through that process to create that limited easement.
You can see the one fun result of, every time you change the discontinuance law or the public easement law, you have different classes of public easements depending on what the time it was created in. And it's a real headache if you're trying to figure out in a real estate transaction what my rights are, or in municipal government what my responsibilities are. And so that's why, it's nice to talk about changes, but we've got to be really careful with those changes and see what do they affect, what do they impact.
Yeah, Jim, if I could just chime in there. Another scenario is the roads that were private, never discontinued, never, because they were a private road, and at some point in time, the town accepted a public easement and changed the classification of the road from private to public easement without ever discontinuing and retaining a public easement. That probably doesn't happen very often, but it does happen.
Well, a town can lay out a road as a public easement from the get-go. Doesn't happen, you're right, it doesn't happen very often, but either it's a new road or it could be an old private road that all of a sudden, well, we want to give the public rights over this, and presumably they'd pay a little bit of money or there'd be some reason to do that, and then the town would lay it out. But that's a little bit different than 2. 2 is talking about retaining the automatic public easement when you're trying to get out of something being a town way or a county way and you're dropping it down. But definitely, we have to keep in mind that there are all kinds of public easements created different ways and different times. It's a flexible concept, and we have all those old private ways to get the goods from the farm to the town that also are public easements, as well as the recreational type public easements. And that gets us into 3, statutory terminology. It is a nightmare when the same term is used to mean 2 or 3 different things, depending which statute you're in.
If I can jump in here for just a minute.
Please.
I think I can address somewhat what Ryan was talking about. There are actually a lot of towns that have declared their private roads to be public easements for the purpose of being able to plow them in the winter. And so there are a lot of public easements that come in that category. And these are roads that had been traditionally private roads. And now, in order to get the benefit of town plowing, which they had been getting for years as a courtesy until the court said that was illegal. Now they've accepted these public easements, and they're finding out that, oh no, because we accepted a public easement, now we've got ATVs using the road. So that is a problem. And the reason that exception was put in on the abandonment statute when that was revised a couple of years ago is because people were having problems with ATVs tearing up these roads that are not maintained by the public. And, you know, if you have a responsible ATV club and they're doing a great job of maintaining the ATV trail, and somebody from out of town who's not a member of the club comes in and uses it at the wrong time of year or is doing donuts in it, that can, you know, one user can do a horrible job on a road that somebody's depending on for access to their home.
Yeah, and as to the first part of your comment, there are a number of communities, particularly communities with a lot of lake frontage, where you have seasonal homes, where you know, the residents would scream, you know, I don't get anything from my tax dollars. I don't have kids in school, but I'm paying property taxes. I got to get something. Will you grade my road or whatever? And there have been a number of those municipalities where if you live in those communities, you sign this piece of paper and tell the town, yes, the public is welcome to come down my road and please maintain it. You know, it's a private road. And you can come in, you can grade it, you can sweep it back, make sure that it's wide enough. And it's a legal fiction in a sense, but that is what led to the private and special law for Wyndham for the special designation of roadways that happened a couple of years ago, or a year ago. And
what happened with Wyndham was, as you said, they just had the owners sign a piece of paper, but that was a temporary thing. If the owners changed, then you run into the problem that Rebecca mentioned, where
right.
now it's not the same owners. Now what? That's why what should be done is to do the formal dedication and acceptance of the road as a public easement. And then it shouldn't change if the landowners change, because that's what the road is. But it still leaves the problem of, well, does that mean now the ATVs can use it?
So back to the point though, there is a process, right? And we don't feel that that legal process that exists today to go from private to public easement needs to be changed, correct? We all do we agree that that process is working? Now, we might not always like the result, but there is a process, right? So do we agree to that or not?
I think that could use some refinement to answer that issue of public abuse of a public easement.
But that's more of an enforcement action issue that we get into a little later anyway.
Yeah, like, is that what you're referring to, Roberta, as enforcing issues?
Certainly would help.
Okay. As to statutory terminology under 3, I think we've picked up most of the issues. Roberta has one to add. I think it's appropriate with regard to yet another definition of private way under state law. And, you know, it just helps to show the confusion and just to try to educate the legislature to be careful about what it does in one section, because it can affect other statutes, or we want to make sure that there's some consistency here, or more than there is now.
Yeah, that's where I think it might be good to mention the legislation that is being proposed this session by Vitale and Hepler, and I forget which one of them is a representative and which one is a senator. I apologize, but they are presenting legislation that addresses a number of issues with private roads, and one of them is the definitions. There is no definition of private road, and the Maine Alliance for Road Associations has proposed that there should be a definition of what a private road is, and that the term private way should be retired and replaced by public easement. Because that would eliminate a lot of the confusion.
Do you have a copy or an LD number for that? I can go look, but.
I can find it.
Okay, if you could send that to me, that would be helpful. We can mention that as among the, one of the proposals to try to eliminate or reduce confusion.
As was said 10 minutes ago, that when someone proposes a bill for further change, does it make it better or worse? In many cases, it's worse. And I'm thinking, if an LD like this goes forward, without knowing the work that we're involved with here, are they going to yet again make it worse or better?
Well, this commission is available, Pete, to the legislature, so that if they have questions about that, they can ask us to take a look at it, and we can have another meeting during the session to look at that and other legislation that might come up.
The last sentence there in section 3 on page 3 about how we recommend further work to determine these sources of confusion. Well, there's another case if a bill comes up right here, but are we actually going to go as far as, was saying further work to determine that? Well, who's going to do that work, and who's going to come up with a language to eliminate all this confusion and come up with definitive definitions of easements, ways, roads, and so on? That are we going to go that far and actually suggest or recommend some language? Because I've got to believe that this group right here is probably best suited to come up with stuff like that, instead of people that really don't know what they should on this subject and unintentionally making it worse. I just think it would be a good opportunity for us, if we're saying this, okay, then what do we have for suggestions?
And that's why I thought that bill ought to be mentioned in here, so that if it does come before the legislature, that, assuming it does, that they would refer it to us to have us go over it and see if it makes sense or not.
Yeah, and not only deal with the bill issue, but deal with whatever else that may be discussed here, so that we're looking at it, as Jim says on the very last page in here, about how this is a much broader subject, and we need to look at this from a 20,000 foot level instead of just picking away at stuff here and there, because it just tends to get worse.
I think we're the ones who would be doing the further work, or at least talking about it, right? How ambitious do we feel?
Well, I mean, if we're going to recommend something, shouldn't we recommend some language? Because most of us know what we're talking about, rather than saying, okay, we recommend someone else do the work and come up with some language, which may not be any better.
Well, I can tell you from memory on that bill that I was talking about, they wanted to define a private road as they're taking some of the language from that other piece of legislation that I mentioned ought to be in there, the definition. And what it says is that a private way is, and it should say a private road is a road that's privately owned and maintained and over which the owner can restrict access, and then stop right there.
Right.
Because then the existing law tacks on to the end of it and includes an abandoned or discontinued road, even if a recreational easement was retained or something like that, which implies that the owner can stop somebody from using that public easement that was laid out for recreational uses, which is, that's where the conflict comes. So they're saying, let's say a private road is privately owned and maintained and the owner can restrict access. And a public easement is for use of public access to land or water for, whatever purpose the public easement is designated for. And take out the confusing term private way, which is defined in conflicting ways.
There's no way that we can come up with that kind of comprehensive recommendation in terms of actual changes, obviously, right now. But what we could say at the end of that sentence is, and the commission is willing to assist the legislature to achieve this end.
Right.
Inviting them to send their ideas to us. We get to meet 3 to 6 times per year. And so during that time, during those times, we could take a look at proposed legislation, up with some ideas to make things better.
I have a question, sorry.
Go ahead.
Like Ryan's example, I believe, where you had a private road and you gave a public easement on it, Ryan, is that correct?
The town adopted it as a public easement. Instead of adopting as a town way, they adopted it as a public easement.
Now, are they required at that point to do snow removal then?
No,
Or not?
it's their option.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know, because that would be a big one for that'd be a big disincentive for the towns to want to do that. I could imagine. But I think there should be some sort of a distinguishing thing between homeowners, for example, using ATVs seasonally on roads that are not plowed in the wintertime or snow sleds to access their property. So they're using what's termed to be recreational vehicles for non-recreational purposes. They're using it for functional purposes to traverse their access when the road doesn't permit them to drive, for example, even a four-wheel drive truck. They might cause too much damage. They might do that seasonally. So that's the other thing I want to mention on that.
I do agree that there should be an exception for property owners accessing a property with an ATV or a snowmobile. We have 2 people with health issues on our road who cutter up and down the road on their ATV occasionally, and they don't do any damage. We have no problem with them. It's, the people who come out and just want to see how much mud they can turn up. Those are the ones that are the problem. But as far as using snowmobiles, yeah, if the road isn't plowed, sure, allow them to use a snowmobile for access to their property. In fact, I had one complaint from somebody in the town of Rumford that there was a subdivision where it was specified that they would not be plowing the roads in the winter and winter access would be by snowmobile. And then they got somebody who bought one of the lots in the subdivision and wanted to plow the whole road. And the other people on the road were irate because they were all counting on being able to go up and down the roads with their snowmobiles.
I will say, like, from our perspective, where it becomes an issue is another landowner complains. And that's when we, from the warden service side, will step in that aspect. So typically, if you have an instance like that where it's a private way or public easement where the camp owners or the landowners are using it, there's never an issue until your neighbor complains on you and says, I don't want you to drive down there with your wheeler. And that's really where the underlying issue is.
How do you resolve that?
I mean, typically it's like, hey, talk to your neighbor, see if you can straighten things out.
Mediation.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reality is they have a right to go down through there. And from our perspective, like, it says by motor vehicle, but if a public easement technically says you can't drive a wheeler and a snowmobile down there. And that's where I look at that and I'm like, okay, why is that? Why? But what it is it's to limit, you don't want the people that are coming down there to recreate.
Right.
Right.
You want the people that live there to use it, but the recreational activity is where, because it's just like anything, you make one snowmobile track everybody else is following it.
Right.
So if you're the landowner down there, there's
Right.
14 other snowmobiles that are coming off the lake to use that trail. It's the nature of it.
Yeah, we've had to sort of reinforce the signage on the corner on our road because the snowmobile trail comes right down the discontinued road and then makes a hard left. And we have a neighbor down the other direction who likes to go and visit his cousin by coming up the road and going out onto the snowmobile trail. And once he's done it, then the other snowmobiles come down the hill and keep on going down the road.
Yeah.
So we've had to put really obvious signs there saying, no, turn here.
And like Jim was kind of alluding to, there is no clear and obvious resolution. It really comes down to working out with your neighbors and that resolution between each other.
What about the number 4 at the bottom of page 3 and then moving on to page 4? The statutory process for the abandonment or discontinuance of a road, including barriers to determining the legal status of a road. That's something the legislature asked us to comment on, and certainly we talked about what there is and is not to try to find out the legal status of a road. The main DOT map viewer tool was something that I think we all learned about here. And we recognize the difficulty that there is, that this is fact specific, it's expensive, it spawns litigation. There's a suggestion for the alternative dispute resolution process. And then increased compliance about recording those notices of discontinuance so that we were able to stumble on them in the registry a little more readily. Are there other ideas, comments, or concerns? From the municipal perspective, the new laws have made things a little bit tougher to discontinue a road. Is that a problem?
From a municipal perspective, this doesn't happen frequently. Frequently what happens is previously discontinued roads have been improved by someone for the purposes of development, and they're accepting new roads. I think that it makes it much more challenging dealing with the multi-layers of the historical, as you know, and requires, in order to make sure that everyone in that whole entire process has their due process, that it requires the court to weigh in, and that's hefty and it's challenging.
Does the up to 1 year delay in discontinuance so that people can sort out whether there are private easements or will be, is that something that's causing problems for municipalities?
The owners just generally don't all agree. So even if that municipality wanted to dispose of it, by doing so, they've disadvantaged someone else by letting that go. So giving them an extra year, at any point in time, they can continue to do that, even if they live in that neighborhood already. But if they're not taking up that mantle, and you can't really legislate good neighbors, essentially. So
No.
Public easement is all that's left. So often is kind of the thing that folks that might be caught in between that have to maintain access to that.
All right, so are there any other comments or thoughts on this piece?
A quick follow-up question for Rebecca. Any idea, Rebecca, how many discontinuances happen in the state on a given year now?
Last time we had sent something out, it was I don't know, like 1 or 2.
1 or 2 a year on average?
That may have happened. I mean, most of the issues I believe that Roberta's folks deal with are all historic, and they are complex and convoluted because of the number of times the legislature has weighed in to try to manage those processes. And then you get a whole new round of folks that buy property, which we had under the pandemic, sight unseen, and have no idea that there's this, but it looks cool and it's on a lake. So
that goes to the historic. That goes to issues arising from historical decisions of the past.
Right, and you can see on some of those individual property exchanges that it was advertised as a seasonal residence. It was, but probably seasonal in their mind is summer because it's water, but in Maine that's actually more likely winter on these particular roads. So you had folks coming up expecting to be able to get to those locations in spring or summer, and certainly cannot. So a lot of it is that, individual responsibility to actually know what you're investing into.
And
what-
Ryan, and the law was changed 4 or 5 years ago to include DOT and a copy of the discontinuance order. And so I can tell you that, because they came to me, I probably, to cooperate with Rebecca, I can probably, since that law went into place, I'm thinking 5 years ago now, I've probably received one hand's worth of order of discontinuances from towns. So
It's very.
1 or 2 per year, maybe.
Yeah, but I guess to that point, though, this isn't something that is, explained in small communities on a regular basis. So I have to think that as there's turnover of folks, how are they even knowing that they have to do that, Pete?
Oh, because MMA has a great process and a flow chart and an explanation of step by step by step what you got to do. And one of the last steps after the town meeting vote is to send a copy to the registry and to the DOT Maintenance and Operations Office. So
Okay.
if they're looking for guidance and they go to MMA and they get this document, they're going to follow the steps.
Yeah,
What
okay.
about towns that aren't looking for guidance?
Yeah, anecdotally, I have heard from some municipal.
Okay. Do what they
They
think.
don't, I mean, if you don't do a task in the municipal context on a regular basis, then you're reaching out to MMA legal in order to get them to understand that process. They're gonna point them in direction of the handbook and the lined way in which they're supposed to go through that, and
I
it's not
think most
something that.
towns, most towns want to do it right,
Right.
but that's not to say there aren't some out there that,
But
well,
that-
yeah, we'll
that
just
would be
do this
easy
and the
to
selectmen
challenge as
do it.
well too, yeah, it would be really easy to challenge those ones as well.
Exactly.
Hopefully, there's not as much of that as there used to be. I have examples of towns where they listed off a dozen roads and said that they were putting them on the discontinued list, and if they stayed there for 30 years, they would then formally notify the DOT and the Registry of Deeds that they were abandoned. And this was a
Well, that's
vote
a
by the
long time for
selectmen.
those people to access their rights, which is which is also inherent in that abandonment, that there's been a lack of access on the individual to exercise their rights. I mean, if you got 30 years to weigh in before that takes place, there's some impetus on the
But a
individual
lot of
to
people don't know
enforce
that.
their rights.
A lot of people don't know that there's a process that they can go through to get the county to force the town to maintain the road. I know of several instances where people have complained to the town repeatedly, would you fix the road? Would you fix the road? Would you fix the road? In writing even. And the
If they
town.
Google, they're gonna get your website.
Hmm?
If they Google, they're gonna get your website.
Hopefully.
I have a different point of view on something here. I live in Frenchville. I've got 2 new neighbors right across the road. One is a renter, one's a buyer. The buyer bought his house here because he was told he had snow sled access from his house. And I just helped him with a new ownership around here and new right of ways and things like that, where he is actually going to be able to do it from his place. But he actually told me I would not have bought my house had I known that I didn't, the snow sled access to the trail system was not guaranteed here. He was told that by the seller. So I just wanted to throw that out because we know how some people are so into this, right? They want to do it the right way, but they're told about access, in this case for recreational purposes. That's not necessarily the case. So I just wanted to throw that perspective out. Thank you.
We need something else on the real estate disclosure checkoff list.
The reality of that is though, that could change tomorrow.
Exactly.
Everybody owns their own property and they can choose what the trail system is gonna be. And if
Well,
there's
Well, I think that is the thing to communicate to these buyers. Then they, like we don't necessarily have to say that they're guaranteed this. They can say they have whatever the current access is, but keep in mind, this is not guaranteed, right? I think that's the point, is to communicate that to people.
Buyer beware.
I think there needs to be a pamphlet that gets handed out to people who buy land on roads that are not publicly maintained, saying, okay, this is what this term means. This are the ramifications of it. You know, if it says it's a public easement, that means the public can use it, but the public doesn't maintain it. If it says it's a recreational easement, that means that as long as the landowners have given them permission, there may be access by ATV or snowmobile, but you know, they need to know this, because otherwise somebody sees recreational access and they think, oh, that means that I can drive into my house and then use my ATV to get to the ATV trail. Or somebody else may think, you know, seasonal, well, that means all 4 seasons. I can use it in the winter with my snowmobile. I can use it in the summer with my car. They need to know what these terms mean.
But if that happened, Roberta, you wouldn't have anything to do anymore in main roadway.
Jim would have no clients. I apologize, I have to take off and
Yeah.
head over to that building. but-
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you.
and thank you for all the work on this.
Well, thank you. Wait, well, let me ask this musical question before you take off, since we have a quorum, we have everybody here. Are we at a point where people want to take a vote on the overall report with changes, or do we need to talk about more changes?
I think we're ready for a vote.
I agree.
Only if it means that anything's edited after I leave. I don't approve.
That's right.
Or we need to check in with you at least.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to submit comments after.
We still got 2.5 pages to go through.
All right, okay, well, then we'll have to take that without your vote, Rebecca, so I apologize.
I'll submit after, or I'll submit a objection if I object to anything to tack on, but.
All right, we'll turn around. Thank you. We appreciate your input.
One other thing that keeps kind of coming to my mind, we keep talking about all the times the law has changed and it makes it confusing. There's one case that has a whole list of other cases talking about the results of retrospective legislation. And this is a real problem, and it's part of why we are in such a mess that we're in now, because there have been things that were changed and that affected things that had happened before. For example, saying that private ways are now considered to be public easements. Well, the problem is that in changing it from a private way to a public easement, they not only changed the terminology, but they changed the definition. Because private ways originally were to provide access to property. And then they said, well, they couldn't just be private access to property, there had to be some public benefit. And then they said, well, it's got to be more than just theoretical public benefit, there actually has to be public benefit. And then they said, well, there's actually got to be public use of the road. And then they changed the term to public easement. And in the process, they took down the possibility of having gates and bars to discourage unwarranted nuisance traffic. So it's retrospective legislation, because what it was when it was laid out is not what it is now. And this is where we've gotten into a lot of problems with these things. So now the question is, well, we've got this mess. How do we straighten it out on all these roads we've already got? We can't do retrospective legislation because it makes more of a mess.
Oh, sure we can. Notwithstanding 1 MRSA section 302, this modifies Maine law back to 1821. No, I'm kidding. There is a retroactivity clause that we sometimes invoke, but I think the idea is that these changes are intended to generally be prospective, although that one changing private ways to public easements did affect what had been laid out going back a long, long ways. All right.
Jim, on page 4,
Yes.
that paragraph that says finally in this regard,
Right.
down at the bottom where you say that the legislature has made several changes and sometimes that's not good and it creates maybe more disputes and litigation. Is this again where you want to add the sentence there about, in fact, this commission is willing to work with the legislature on any upcoming bills so that these are looked at least somehow the commission's involved.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't happen again to make it worse.
We'll work with you to make sure things don't get worser.
There you go.
Okay.
That sounds like a Henry comment there, Jim.
That
Henry
is
Kissinger.
part of what we were commissioned to do.
That's right. That's part of our duties. Okay, can add that there if everyone's all right with that. I think it's a good suggestion. And then when we talk about all the things that are on pages 2 through 4 are the duties that were given to us, things that we were supposed to look at. Then we were supposed to go and see what the priorities were based upon the comments and report back. And so that's what pages 4, 5, and 6 all discuss. First one, and it seemed like there was a tie, a three-way tie, access, liability, and maintenance and prevention, maintenance of roads and prevention of damage, all seem to be equally important to all the people who wrote or spoke with us. And that's what we talked about at the last meeting. Do we still feel that way?
Yes.
And I recognize Roberta's comment about the main roadway members. Then the constitutionality of public easements goes toward that access issue, really, in part. So we can include that in there, and I think as part of the response. Were there any changes that folks wanted to make to those 3 topics? Text.
Jim, on the top of page 6, that starts with road inventory.
Yes.
It says it's been suggested an inventory of the status of municipal roads be prepared. That could have a lot of meanings in itself. Are you talking about, when I read that as town ways, public town ways or easements. I think what you're saying here is that all roads, regardless of their condition or status in a town, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Where are you, Pete?
Top of
That's the
page
first sentence on top of page 6, road inventory. For many years, it has been
full
suggested
roads.
an inventory of the, I guess I would add, of the legal status of municipal roads be prepared. And the question Pete raises is, were we talking about town ways, or are we talking about town ways or public easements? I would say town ways or public easements. We'd want to know what's the legal status? What is it? And of course, some of these are easy to answer, as Roberta points out with her with that list from Rodenham, and some aren't. But and so that's legislation in place. That burden has been defeated as a large unfunded state mandate. And I think that's something Rebecca had mentioned. And there are practical issues, because you could hire or get a bunch of dedicated volunteers and even some volunteer lawyers, try to look that up. Some of those things are only going to be resolved by a court. But we can try to list what it is. But then there's the responsibility under the second paragraph. Whose job is it to put that together? Is that town by town? Is that going to be DOT? Is that going to be the Attorney General's office? I mean, who's got that responsibility? Who's going to put together the list? Who maintains the list? Who's going to pay for all that? So these are all issues that go into the road inventory, no matter how well-intentioned and how wonderful a tool that would be. We've got all those issues to discuss. So what we've wound up recommending is that, yes, this is an issue. It would be great to have a road inventory of what's a public way, what's a town way, what's a public easement. For now, the best thing we can do is tell you whether it's publicly maintained. We can direct you to MDOT's map viewer tool, and maybe realtors should be looking at that. And maybe the legislation that's in effect now for real estate brokers ought to be coordinated with that MDOT tool. That's the information that's publicly available. And so this is the suggestion we would make. Are we all on board with that idea?
Couple of suggestions I would make. One is, would it fix that first 2 lines there if you just crossed out the word municipal? We said the status of roads, and that would include public roads, private roads, discontinued roads, abandoned roads. That's really what we're looking for. I think is an inventory that whatever kind of road a person buys property on, they're going to be able to find out what the status of that road is, whether it's a municipal road or not a municipal road.
Well, abandoned and discontinued roads is our forte, and that comes about from municipal and county roads.
Former municipal and county roads.
Yeah, but not state roads.
Actually, no, a few state.
Well,
roads
you
are
could
good.
drop it down to a townway from a state road, I suppose. Okay, well, we could just say legal
I could
status.
interject something, sorry. I agree with you, and I know that it would be very difficult to find the status of all the roads, especially the ones that would need to go to a judge. I'm just wondering if the initial inventory could identify those that are nebulous, that require a lot more work, put them on and identify them as such. Identify them as like that, the jurisdiction or whatever is unclear. And that would be a separate entity unto itself that you might put some resources into is to go to that level. But I think, again, maybe 90% of the roads, even including the private roads, could be probably fairly easily identified by the towns if there was the money to put somebody on the inventory, you know, whether it's led by DOT. I would suggest MDOT should take the lead. We want ultimately the information to go to MDOT, update that system. So I would say that they would take the lead, maybe work with Maine Municipal to get that kind of thing done. But I think, again, a separate category for those that need more work, and be upfront on the fact that they're unknown or currently undetermined. Thanks.
I'm gonna stick up for Pete here and say he's already got too much to do. I think we can find somebody better to prepare the inventory. I do think, though, that once we've got the inventory prepared for a town, that it should go to somewhere in the DOT. And I know the Division of Rights of Way has their whole catalog of discontinued county roads. And it seems like it makes sense to put towns with that, because they've already got the information there. And I also agree with what you're saying about some of them being easy and some of them being more complicated, and just identify them as such. The DOT's listing of county roads has a lot of roads that are listed as not located. They've got the discontinuance order, and they know exactly what it says. It says it's discontinued from Jones's Barn to Fred's Stone Wall. But who knows where they lived, 150 years ago. So these roads they're listed. And what often happens, well, I shouldn't say often, but often enough, somebody will get in touch with me saying, I'm on this road. I don't know if it's got a name. It goes from such and such to so-and-so. And I've been told that it was an old county road, but nobody seems to know if it was discontinued properly or not. So I go and I look through the listing of county roads at the DOT, and that road isn't listed, but there are 3 roads that are listed as not located. So I asked the guy in the Division of Rights of Way to send me the printouts on those 3. And I look at them, and one of them says it's west of the pond. Well, this road is east of the pond, so it's not that one. One of the roads says it runs north-south, and this one runs east-west, so it's not that one. But this one, it says it goes by so-and-so's mill, and there is a stream there. And you start looking back in the deeds and you find out, oh, so-and-so bought their land from the person of the same name as the person at the mill. And you start digging into it and you can actually locate where that road was. Now, this isn't something that the DOT had time to do for every single one of these not located roads. But if somebody's looking for that one road and they've got the discontinuance order in front of them, they can say, oh, I can look this up and figure out maybe what that one road is. So I think that's the way to go about it is, yes, list the ones that we know where they are. We know what they are. The discontinuance order was done properly. There's no loose ends on it. And then we have these others where the town says the road was to be closed to maintenance only. Well, what's that mean? Or we voted to keep the road as it is. Well, what was it? And I actually have cases where that's the wording in the discontinuance order. So those are the ones where we're going to have to say, okay, we don't know what these are, but we've got these 8 others that we do know what they are. So, have all those records there where people can find them.
So a couple comments there. I did check with our property office, and I checked with one of the older fellows that has since retired, but he comes back and works part-time. And I asked him, why did DOT go out and do this in the 70s? And he explained it to me, and it's a good reason. He said back then, we had probably 6 or 8 DOT right-of-way mappers And we had all kinds of projects going on, and we had no idea what the rights of way were on a whole bunch of roads. And this was in the 70s, before 1981, when the great turnback occurred, so there was a lot more state aid roads out there that in 81 became local. So they had all these projects, and what they would do is they would go into a town, let's say you get in town X, and there's a project coming up, they had no idea what the right of way was, so they had to go to the town, dig through all this stuff. And I guess the director at the time said, this is kind of foolish. Why don't we just go out and spend a fair amount of time and go to the county offices and go to some of the towns, not all of them, and get as much information as we can so that we have that available. And then when we have projects come up in the future, we just tap into that. But that's when we had 6 to 8 mappers down here, and up where the section I'm in, we had an inventory section where we had 6 guys that maintained local road inventory and met with towns every 4 years. Well, that 6 guys is down to me.
Mhm.
And
That's why I
the
said he's got
staff
enough to
for
do.
doing this stuff does not exist.
Mhm.
And knowing that, I can tell you right now that my role here on the commission is kind of limited, because the administration DOT is not going to pick up more work. And we're not going to be the repository for all of this old discontinued road stuff, when it really has nothing to do with DOT. So it's not going to happen at DOT unless someone else makes a decision on that.
I didn't mean to think I was dumping more work on you, for God's sakes, but what I
No,
was
no.
thinking, if there was monies available, that you would be the people with the system. You've already got a great system. So certainly whatever the update is, you would be the people, you'd be the guy to come up with exactly what we need to provide for update for information. So, yeah.
And remember, the map viewer is a combination of DOT information that I get from towns on what they maintain, but it also is matched with the E911 system at the PUC, which when you see a given road in kind of a gray color, that's a private, or it's a not, I don't want to say it's a private road, it's a non-maintained town road. That info comes from 911 because there are people that live there. So any other roads where people do not live, 911 doesn't have, the addressing officer hasn't had to send anything in to them. DOT has no interest in this. So if we were to change this language to status of roads in a town, we know the town maintained ones, we know the non-maintained ones where people live because they're showing up. But the other ones that exist that may be discontinued or abandoned, I think that's what the goal of this inventory is. But, I don't know where that's all gonna sit.
Back when they attempted to have towns do an inventory before, and they were supposed to send it to you.
Yeah.
Was that going to be a huge problem for you too, or how is this different from that? That's what I'm asking.
If I remember right, Roberta, that language, which was in there, whatever it was, 6-7 years ago. They were supposed to send us an inventory, I think, of the public roads they maintained.
No.
I'd have to go back
it
and
was-
read how that,
It was supposed to be including all abandoned and discontinued roads, I believe. Because you've already got the list of the ones that they maintain.
I don't recall that, because I would have said, wait a minute, that's gonna create a ton more work here. All we care is about town maintained roads. And plus, when the language changed to may submit, May gave every town that might have known they had to do such a thing a ticket to say, we're not doing that, we got other things to do. So that's why I got 0 summaries.
Should we be including reference to that legislation in this section as well? Sorry, that kind of gets us a little off topic, but
Yeah,
I'm just wondering for completeness
it could.
if we should reference. It was, you probably know better what it was, Roberta.
Don't
Yes,
remember, because it doesn't actually have a number, because it
Oh,
Because
it
it
was-
said May.
it was a
You can explain it
resolve.
better than
A
I can.
resolve.
So, yeah, the thing that Roberta sent the other day, the bill that was done, there were lots of changes to specific statutory sections, 23 MRSA, something, something, something. But the very last one, section 10, was just a resolve. It was a one-time statement, the town shall do this and submit this to DOT by, I think it was December 1st of 18 or something. It was a specific date. It was a one-time thing. Get her done, and this is, it's not a statutory, you won't find it in a statute.
Shall, but we don't have to do it.
Correct, but
But
it's,
they
it was,
changed it from shall to may.
but it's not in the statute. You won't find that. It was just in the bill as a resolve for towns to do this.
Okay, I'll dig that up and add that. So just from my takeaway from what I'm hearing is we'd change this, so it would say, for many years, it has been suggested that an inventory of the legal status of all roads, state highways and roads, county roads, townways, or public easements, and private roads be prepared. Then we could talk about the legislation that recently was, and it would say that it has been defeated as a large unfunded state mandate. MDOT has insufficient staff and funding to do this inventory, and then talk about the resolve. And then when we talk about the practical issues, we could say there would be some roads that we would not know without the declaratory judgment by the court, but the inventory process would likely identify the legal status of most roads. Think of it as a funnel.
I don't think I'd say just public easements, though, because there are roads that were discontinued without any public easement. So I think it also needs to include abandoned and discontinued roads.
Okay.
I don't know if we need to include state roads.
Correct.
So we're focusing on either county or townways. And I say county because some of these roads went from town to town, or considered county roads, and there's still the abandonment and discontinuance process applies to county roads. Are we concerned about those or no?
We also have roads that are not within organized townships that are still county roads.
Right. Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know what the right term is. We at the county we have a distinction between county roads and roads in the unorganized territories. We consider roads in the unorganized territories as local roads for our purposes.
Okay.
So I don't know how how you would define that in state law. Because they are very, a local, a road in the UT that we're maintaining is very different than an old county road that transcended towns, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yes, I do think they should be included though, don't you think, Ryan, when they're doing the inventory?
The unorganized territory roads?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't disagree. I'm just, sitting here listening to the conversation. I can tell you that what's being talked about right now is a really big ask for a lot of places. I mean, I know roads in my head that are discontinued that you would drive by, Steve, and you wouldn't even know they were discontinued. You wouldn't even know they were a road at one time.
And we could make that even more complicated by saying, what about paper streets?
Paper street.
Because,
yeah.
paper streets were laid out, shown on subdivision plans, but they weren't built out. Or many of them weren't built out. They weren't accepted. They weren't used. When I was Associate Corporation Counsel in Portland back in 86, 87, Portland had about 330 paper streets.
And those can often be just as controversial for a town to deal with 30 or 40 years later.
Right. Well, let's say we'll leave that out of our job description for now. We've got enough. But just to give you an idea, there's an awful lot of issues related to these roads generally.
and like one more last thing, like for example, up here around Long Lake and St. Agatha, you'll go into unorganized townships on the same road. You just run into unorganized townships, and that goes for the town roads, and the private roads and everything, it just blends right in.
Imagine the number of logging roads up there too, privately owned by the timber companies.
So I hate to prolong this, but
Go
are we
ahead.
really talking about old discontinued roads that are all overgrown now and there's just not even a road there anymore? Do we really care about that?
I think the thing to do is to start with the easy ones. And once we've got the easy ones down, then progress to the harder ones. So maybe an inventory, okay, we've already got an inventory of roads that are maintained by the town. We've already got the 911 inventory of private roads.
Yeah.
So what's the next step? Next step maybe is roads where we can find a formal discontinuance. And then maybe from there we get into roads that have been abandoned, because those are gonna be harder to find the records. So take it one step at a time. Don't try to do the whole thing at once.
We could add that idea that we could do this incrementally.
Jim, one little typo there under the indented section on page 6.
Yes.
Third line down over to the right, it says when and if.
Okay, thank you. Did I ever tell you I never took a typing course?
That's the first thing I did in high school, and I remember at South Poland High School, I was one boy out of 100 girls at typewriter school.
I took typewriting too in high school. It was my best thing except for band.
There you go.
Yeah, it's one of the best things I ever did, because I heard about this. We were gonna start having computers and we're gonna have to start learning to type. And I said, geez, maybe I ought to learn how to do that.
I wish
Plus, my
somebody
father
told
was
me
a
about
typewriter
that.
repairs salesperson anyway.
I wish that somebody had told me about that. So there we go. Any other ideas or concepts? Paragraph C on page 6 really talks about, it's a complex area and we welcome the opportunity to provide suggestions to the legislature, which is what we were talking about earlier, with our future meetings. And then D, we're prepared to assist the legislature on, as legislation comes up on request. So, assuming that I make the changes, which I intend to do, that we've all talked about today, and then Vivian's going to vet that to make sure that I got them all, and we prepare that report. Are we prepared to adopt that as our final report today?
I think so.
Our final preliminary report.
That's right. Final preliminary report. Stay tuned, and we'll give you more when you ask. Is anyone opposed to that idea? I don't think we have time to have another read through and meeting before February 1st when this is due. Vivian and I promised to do our best to accurately capture the comments that were made here today. So
Can you maybe send it out with the changes made in red, the way Vivian has done with the minutes?
Yeah, we could do that. I suppose I could do a compare draft.
I'm a little concerned with the timeline.
Yeah.
I think we should give you a creative license to represent the discussions today and the concerns that were expressed today and incorporate them like you've summarized along the way here. I'm very comfortable with it myself, that you can just do your thing to finish it up.
Yeah, I trust Jim and Vivian to get this done.
What I'll do is this, Roberta, I understand the request. It's just it can become a little difficult when you get the 30-page report to show all red lines. But what I can do is for the 6 pages of the actual text, where we really talk about, when I do that up, I'll do that as a Word document, and I'll run a comparison to where it is right now, and that comparison will show you the changes. And so I can send that to you, and I can send it to each commission members separately, you know, as along with the final report, so that you'll see what was changed. Is that fair? Okay. If we're all in agreement, is there a motion to adopt the draft with the changes as we discussed as the final report of this commission? Okay. So that was motion by Roberta. Is there a second? Steve, second?
Yes.
Okay, now a roll call vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Are we doing a roll
Praveen,
call?
you're muted. Do you want to call the roll? Still on mute.
Working on it.
There we go. Thank you.
How about that?
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. I'll take a roll call vote to, on Pete's motion and Roberta's second to adopt the report as, to be amended based on our discussions today. Jim,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Carla,
Yes.
I vote yes. Roberta,
Yes,
Pete,
Yes,
Chris,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
unanimous of the members present.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you all very, very much for working through that document and for all your work in the past several meetings to get to this point. Again, I apologize for not being there today and making this a little more difficult by having to participate online, but thank you for bearing with me on that. Under other business and announcements, is there anything else that we have to discuss today?
Jim, once this report gets done by February 1st, we assume that, I think it's state and local, isn't it, that's getting this?
Right.
That they're gonna somehow read it, take action, or do whatever they do on it. And then we're gonna expect some sort of reaction from that, but where are we going from here? Now that we've done that, what's our direction?
We'll see if they send a check. I'm kidding. But we will hear during the session if they need any, if they would like any comment on particular bills that have been introduced, such as the one that Roberta was talking about. And I'm sure there'll be others. So I would anticipate that state and local might ask us to consider things. We might want to meet to talk about those as the session goes on. Otherwise, it's going to be up to us as to what we want to focus on in order to resolve some of the issues that we've spotted through this report. And so I think that all of us will remain in touch. And if we're not asked by the legislature to respond to something in particular, we might want to, at some point, as the legislature winds down or during the summer, say, okay, with the emergency session, the second session coming up, is there something that we think needs to be addressed, something we hear from roadways members, from municipalities, from MDOT, from the county, from user groups, the ATVs, the snowmobilers, recreational users? Is there something that needs to be addressed? And is this something we want to weigh in on? And I think that's maybe the way to just leave it open. I don't know that there's anything in particular that how does the group feel?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. The question I guess I have on our draft report here is, how does the legislature handle it, Jim? Will they hold a public hearing on our draft report and review it in public session, and we can show up there and participate, or is it just handed over to them and nothing else happens?
I'm going to defer to Vivian on this because I haven't been to too many committee meetings lately.
I think it's likely that they may ask us for a presentation, or they might ask our presence when they consider it. I don't know that there would be a public hearing because there isn't legislation pending. I don't know that they would even ask for input from the public at this point, especially knowing the the volume that they're gonna have before us in our report. But my guess would be they would schedule a time to review the report back and give us notice of that, and Jim or I or both or whoever else wants to be part of it would be present for them to address us, and they would probably give us a heads up if they want an affirmative presentation or summary.
Right, and because it would be a public meeting, it would be something that any member of the commission could attend either in person or I would assume remotely.
Oh, absolutely, that's what I meant. I didn't mean to
that's
pick
fine.
and choose. I just said if we need a spokesperson, yeah, we can figure that out for sure.
All right, anything else we should discuss today?
Your point, Jim, about kind of waiting a little bit to see how this percolates, I think it's probably premature and not very efficient to try to set a next meeting date since we do have a handful of people absent. So as we go forward, we'll stay in touch by email. I'll certainly let you know if I hear of any rumblings or developments. And then you'll get a doodle poll for me if we need to set up a time to meet based on anything that evolves.
Very good. And it's entirely possible that once we invite the legislature to ask us for comments on particular legislation, they might actually ask. And at that point, that would be certainly good reason to have a meeting. All right, so.
Another thing that I've been thinking about, how are we doing with getting the YouTube channel up? And how about posting the recordings of our meetings?
I have not had the bandwidth to focus on the YouTube channel, given the report and the interviews and all that stuff. I don't think that the Zoom meetings could be then posted to the YouTube. Maybe they can, but I don't know the answer to that. If anybody knows a crackerjack person who can help with that kind of stuff. We don't really use YouTube in my office. I don't have that sort of person. I was hoping that would have been squarely in the paralegal's point. But the one thing I did want to ask, I'm glad you mentioned it. Has anybody tried to access the shared folder with the Zooms? Has anyone I had success today sharing it with a member of the public who asked for it, and I sent the whole folder. I got an email back saying this person has accessed it. I said, let me know if you had any trouble. I haven't heard anything from him. So I can try to just resend it to everyone. But the way it's supposed to work, to be clear, is whenever I move a recording like today's, once today's downloaded into that folder, it should automatically show up in yours. Like it should refresh it and show up in there. So I can try resending the whole folder again to everyone to see.
Because what I found was that I had, I think, the first 4 meetings, and I had the 4th meeting twice, but no 5th meeting. And if I try to send it, if I try to post the link on the Facebook page, and then I go to my personal Facebook page and try to get into it to see if it works, it brings me a message saying that it can only be opened by the people to whom.
Yeah, the way it gets shared in the state system, it has to be specifically to certain people. So yes, if you have somebody who wants them, they can send me their email or have them email the Abandoned Roads Commission, info@abandonedroads.
Okay, that's
Commission.
because I have had people ask for it.
Maybe I think that's the way to do it.
Okay, I hate to bother you with all their requests.
Well,
I don't know how many there will be, but
they're entitled to it. So they're entitled to it, and hopefully someday we'll have a paralegal, so it can be the kind of thing that can be tended to.
That's why she gets the extra $500 a month to maintain.
Right.
yeah, one thing I was wondering about, and then, just trying to kind of brainstorm on how can we get around this glitch. Would it be possible to open up another email account and send it to that email account and give everybody that email address and tell them?
I can't imagine the state would give, you mean give everyone access to that email?
It'd be an email account that would be just for that.
I don't really know how, then that would mean everyone would have access. I don't think that would work. I can't imagine they would say yes to that. I like the way you think. I do like the way you think, but I don't think that anyone out of the state of Maine out of the state of Maine system without actual ties to a certain piece of business can have access. access to
Trying
that
to think
way.
of some
No, I
way that
hear
it
you.
could be automatic, so we wouldn't have to have everybody bothering you.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Well, one of these days, once we get this report done, I can focus on the YouTube channel.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Hopefully nothing else comes up that takes all your time.
Oh, yeah, well, you know.
Oh.
But
All
that
right.
goes back to the point of, we don't have any place for these things to live if the
No.
free YouTube channel doesn't work. So that goes all the way back to, but maybe we could use the duck up that Pete's talking about, and
I
that
like that
we
workshop.
can find out a way for those things to talk to each other.
So Jim, when you get this report done, and Vivian, you're gonna submit it, right?
Yes, I'm gonna be the one who takes care of filing it on the
All right,
first.
so because we have no place for it to live. There's no, how are people that might be interested? Well, I'd kind of like to see the report.
It's a good question. Very
Do
good.
we? Oh, and we're all gonna have copies of it. Can we, we can just, that's the only way we're gonna be able to distribute it, right? We
And
just,
people
Public
can
record, right. And
people
so
can
it's
send
public record, so you
mail to me too.
okay.
send it.
Yep.
All right. Well, if that's it for today, I want to thank everyone for their work, their effort, their input, their comments on this. Thank you all for taking part in this process. And is there a
The one that
motion?
did the work is, yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank
No, no,
you,
no.
Jim.
Well, thank you, but there was a lot of help here and a lot of good ideas, so thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're not going to worry about a roll call for this one.
You're
Thank
not. You're not.
Thank you all very much. Thanks for your help. Take care.
Feel better,
Going
Jim.
Sideways.
So
Thanks.
now I can go to the state library and look up town reports.
Thanks for all your work. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Stay safe in this storm.
That's gonna be the worst. I think I'm gonna get out at 3 o'clock in the morning.